I'm Paul Llewellyn, and welcome to Rainmakers, where we share the stories of those making a difference in their communities. We often think of evangelism as something that happens in a church or behind a pulpit or in an organized setting. But what if some of the most powerful moments of faith happens in the most unexpected places? On a flight, in a business deal, or in a casual conversation with a stranger? For Herb Larson, ministry doesn't have a script. It happens in real life, wherever God opens a door. From Hollywood elites to Hell's Angels, from corporate boardrooms to street encounters, Herb has witnessed firsthand how faith reaches people in ways we don't expect. In this episode of Rainmakers, we step outside the walls of traditional evangelism and into the unpredictable, inspiring, and sometimes even shocking ways God moves in everyday interactions. Herb, welcome back on Rainmakers.
Well, great to be here, Paul.
This is our third conversation that we're having.
Yes.
And one of the things I noticed is that you and I fly a lot.
Yep.
You're all over the world. I'm usually here in North America. But sometimes when we're on flights, we meet people that have an impact on our lives, but that we can have an impact on their lives in telling the story of what God's done in ours. Do you have a story of an impact? Because we mentioned that in the intro about meeting people on flights. Is there a story that you have that sticks out in your mind?
I got so many
share?
stories that take 3 days to get through them because flights are great. Why?
Okay.
Because the people can't get away.
That's right.
I hate to put it that way, but I always look at those as divine appointments because so often I've had people have to change a seat, for example, just before they get on the plane and they're disgruntled. And guess what? We wind up sharing.
Mhm.
Yeah, I've had some amazing ones. The one time I had a guy who's a high-level professor who sits on the U.S. Energy Commission. This comes out later. He happens to sit next to me, and I'm going to Chicago and then on to a place called Andrews University to speak. And he's going to Washington, D.C. to sit on the U.S. Energy Commission. So we get chatting after a while on the flight. And so he says, I said, where are you going? Oh, I sit on the U.S. Energy Commission. I'm a professor and blah, blah, blah. And then 2 weeks a month, I'm on the Energy Commission. What about you? And I says, well, I'm going. He says, where are you going? What are you speaking about? Because I told him I'm going to lecture. And I says, well, Christian topic. And he says, like what? And I says, well, I'm going to theological seminary to speak. And he says, so you're a Christian then? And I said, yeah, I am. And he says, well, I'm an atheist. And that's how it started.
Mhm.
Make a long story short, we had lots of times. That was like a 4-hour flight. So I basically, and I have a kind of a bit of a pattern I follow. I like to use logic on atheists because if I say God's real, they're going to say no. And I say yes, no. And the heels dig in, nobody gets anywhere. So I take them to the differences in our belief systems. I said, whether God is real or not is irrelevant. Do I believe that God's irrelevant? No, but that's where I go to when I'm dealing with somebody who's not a believer. So I told this guy, I said, whether God is real or not is totally irrelevant. It doesn't matter. I said, my belief system is superior to yours. Forget God.
Wow.
And he says, what do you mean by that? I said, well, if you don't mind, I'll share what my belief system compared to yours. And he said, sure, go ahead. I said, well, I believe I was created. I can't prove that. But I said, here's what it does. It opens a door, the possibility that maybe there's a reason for my life. I said, you know what that does for me? It gives me power. It gives me a competitive edge in business over everybody else. And it gives me something to feed off because there's a reason for my life. If there's no reason, I don't have that. I have a competitive edge over everybody else because of that. I said, and I can't prove that I was created. But I said further, as a Christian, I believe that at the end of it all, I'll have eternal life. So I said, my belief system, whether God is real or not, gives me a reason and relevance today and hope for the future.
Mm.
And of course, I expanded on a little more than that. And then I said, if you don't mind, I'll tell you what you believe. He says, yeah, go right ahead. I'm sure you want to know what he believes. And I said, here's what you believe. You believe you evolved from a lower form of animal life that immediately shuts the door there's any reason or purpose for your life. I said, so you go through life living the survival of the fittest narrative because that's what evolution says.
Mhm.
You're going through accumulating things and trying to hold them all together. So at the end of it all, you die, you rot in the ground, and everybody fights over the assets you accumulated. That's all you have in your belief system. Doesn't matter if God's real or not. So my belief system gives me something today and hope for the future. Yours gives you nothing today and no hope for the future. I said, furthermore, I happened to have my Bible in my backpack. I pulled it out. I said, I'm not here to preach, but I said, this is the most controversial piece of literature ever written in history. And these are some of the things I use. I said, everywhere it is, there's arguments. Does it belong in the libraries of the public high schools in North America? I said, but what I find interesting, maybe you can help me on this, what I find interesting, everywhere this book is, this Bible, there's controversy. And those who say that it's shouldn't be in libraries of public high schools say that it's fictitious and it's a myth. Well, if it's fictitious and a myth, what's the threat? Should be no threat to society, no more than Shakespearean writing in Old English and my Bible sitting next to that on the library shelf, Old English as well. If it's a myth, who cares? Why would you argue about it? I said, but what would the result be if it were true, if it weren't a myth? And we had a long pause, and he finally looks at me and he says, I would expect it to be controversial if it's true. I said, that's right. So from there, I went and shared my testimony. We had 3 hours of discussion.
Wow.
On all sorts of things, religious. Make long story short, when we're landing, I said, look, here's what I want you to do. I said, you get a Bible and you spend an hour a day on that Bible. And I will guarantee beyond every shadow of a doubt that your life will explode with relevance in 2 months. And I said, just so you understand, I mean it. Here's my business card. I want to change business cards with you anyways.
Yeah.
You log every hour you spend reading this book as literature. You don't have to believe God's real. Just assume he might be. No commitment in that. I said, after 2 months, if your life doesn't explode with relevance, I will send you a check for whatever the university pays you as a professor. I will return your money. That's how convinced I am your life will change. He says, wow, I've never heard that one before. Anyways, make a long story short, I go do my thing. He does his thing for 2 weeks, comes back. I get the letter. I wished I had the letter right here. But in his letter, he says, while I'm here in Washington, D.C., and he told me that he went to a parochial school, a Catholic school, when he was a kid. He says, for my first time in decades, he says, I opened the Bible and started reading it every morning, and I shared this with 2 other guys, and we have a mutually agreeable that once a week we check on each other to see if it works.
Wow.
And this is 10 days later, I get this letter.
Yeah.
He says, I am struck with how much I'm changing, all because of my chance meeting with you. He became a Christian. And so the best news of that whole thing was he said, I'm changing in his letter, which means I have it in writing that I don't owe him a dime. I'm joking there, but a bit of tongue in cheek.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah, I mean, like what's better than that? You know, I mean, that's better than any deal I could ever make in the world.
Incredible.
I get those all the time.
So, Herb, many people assume sharing Jesus happens in a church or through structured ministry. How did you come to realize that it can happen anywhere?
Well, to be honest, I do revival all over the world. That's where I go into churches of all denominations. I speak with Baptists, Methodists, Nazarenes, Mennonites, Seventh-day Adventists, you name it. When I get into these places, one of the toughest places to do ministry is in church. Why? Because if you happen to be in this thing called Laodicea, where, you're going to church, so everything's okay.
Yeah, Laodicea is lukewarm.
Lukewarm, yeah, exactly. Thank you. It's lukewarm. It's the most challenging place to do ministry, and yet you can do ministry there. But the most exciting ministry is the one-on-one in the world is where I do, that's my favorite ministry. Yes, I do every Wednesday night for 13 years. Bible study on the street in a program called Night Shift with one of your other guests you've had on your, Greg Kotlowski. 2 of us do that for 13 years now. That's phenomenal. But the one-on-one with business people, not just business people, but people in the world, is the pinnacle. Because you're taken from someone with no belief in many cases to discovering that there's something more to life than the misery I'm going through and the uncertainty of life and the unpredictability in life and stuff. That is so fine of an experience, I can't even begin to explain it. It's what changed my perspective on life.
Yeah.
So real ministry happens out on the street.
So do you actively look for opportunities to share your faith, or do they just find you?
They're divine appointments, so I don't set them up. But you have to have your eyes open.
Yeah.
So I prayed this prayer 1,000 times, never worked. Here's the prayer. God, send someone my way today. Nobody ever came,
Yeah.
because that's what all the How to Witness programs said.
Mhm.
Until I found God, found Jesus in a real way. And then now they come all the time, and I just have to be alert. This is a divine appointment. This is a divine appointment. This meeting's a divine appointment. Oh, I can just tell you stories that are just like unbelievable because they're divine appointments. So God's waiting for us to connect with Him, and He says, if you're faithful over little things, I'll make you ruler over bigger things. It doesn't mean that my ministry is bigger than someone else. It just means don't think that you want to enter at the level of maybe sharing with Hollywood celebrities. Because it might be a little bit more intimidating, that setting, than say a forklift driver, just
Yeah.
because that was me.
Yeah.
But God's waiting for you to serve at the level of spirituality you're at. And then He says, well done, you good and faithful servant. I'm going to give you a bigger responsibility. And it just gets richer and richer and richer. So it all happens out in the world. And I like to sports fish. Do a lot of sport fishing. So one of my favorite analogies, because I have to use sport fishing analogies if I'm going to be in church, because people think otherwise you're a barbarian. So for fishing. But anyways,
Right.
so one of my favorite is what we do as Christians. If we want to fish for people out there, we stay in the boat in the church and cast from the windows. And once in a while we get a bite. That's exciting for everybody. Once in a while we hook a fish.
Yeah.
But what do? We just reel them in so fast we just rip the hook right out of their mouth.
Oh.
But if you're a good fisherman,
Yes.
you let them run. And they come back and come back. And then when they see the boat again, the church, they run again. Just play it, play it, play it. But here's what we do sometimes. No, I don't want to say sometimes, just about all the time. You play them right. You get them right to the edge of the boat. And what do we do as fishermen? I will make you fishers of men, right? So the whole church is tipped like this because everybody's down there watching this possible conversion taking place. And so we get them right to the boat. You put the net in, you flip them into the boat. And what happens? I know, I fish a lot. They're just flopping all over and there's slime flying everywhere. And so the first thing we do is say, you're disrupting our peace of mind here. So we get out the clubs and we club them into submission. Now, I know
Wow.
that's tongue in cheek,
Wow.
but that's what we do. We want them to adapt to us when we have to adapt to them. I do a lot of pastoral retreats where I go speak to pastors all over the world. One of the first questions I like to ask is this. When's the last time any of you have been accused of being a gluttonous winebibber? Put up your hands. Not many hands go up. And I said, I'm in the same boat, so I'm not preaching to you, but
Yeah.
I said, let's think about that for a second. If we're not being accused of being a gluttonous winebibber, could it be we're in the wrong place?
Wow.
Because where was Jesus? He was where the slimy fish were.
That's right.
He was in the bars and the taverns of the day.
Yeah.
He's anywhere where he'd be accused of gluttonous winebibber today. That's where we should be. That's where pastors should be. You don't have to go to Tony Campolo and get your stories or Max Lucado. Go to a bar once a month.
Go to a Tim Hortons.
Go to a Tim Hortons. Coffee's the universal smell of socializing.
Yeah. Yeah. And we're afraid to do that. We keep into our little tiny churches and we keep the doors locked. We keep the windows up and it's hard to get in there. I love your analogy about the fish coming in and having to club it, what happens is the end result to the fish? It dies.
Yep.
It dies in the boat. And we want our fish to live.
Yeah, absolutely. Because they're the ones with the testimony.
Yeah. So we need to go where they are.
That's the key, is be where they are.
I had a professor of mine. He took a class on how to reach people in the world.
Yep.
And the class was they divided the pastors there from all faiths. So he got the Seventh-day Adventist pastor got partnered up with a Baptist, and they had to go to a bar for a week.
Wow.
And they walked into that bar, and all of a sudden everybody thought, "Uh-oh, these guys are 5-0. These guys are cops," and all that. So the bartender comes over and he says, "Are you guys cops?" He goes, "No, we're pastors." And he said to everybody, he said, "They're not cops, they're pastors." And all of a sudden people started coming over. What are pastors doing in here?
Beautiful.
And they said, "We've never seen a religious person come to our ground."
Oh, that's like, I
And so
love it.
what they did was their job was to give out tickets to where a famous football player and a basketball player who are Christians were going to come and speak Friday night. And so they gave them out in the bar. That was their job. All the people in the class had to go to the city and go to places they were not familiar with. And on Friday night, they had a come to God moment and just invited people to come to a small group where God would be introduced in their lives.
That's the key.
300 people showed up and 300 people signed up for those small groups. So, what advice would you give someone who wants to share their faith more naturally but doesn't know where to start? A young person sitting here watching, what advice would you give to them, Herb? What advice would you give to a business person or a housewife or somebody that's driving a forklift? What advice would you give?
Well, the first thing is this: you can't share something you already have. It's like we all know who Princess Diana was. I know a lot about her from the media. So if some alien, I'm not saying there's aliens, but somebody came down from another planet and said, Herb, who is this Princess Diana they talk about? I could tell you a lot about her. But if they said, well, what's she really like when you're hanging out with her? Well, I've never done that. Well, who is this Jesus? Oh, I can tell you lots about him. But what's he really like? Well, I already told you about him. No, but what's he really like? See, the number one thing to have an abundant life is find him first. And there's only one way to find him. That is to seek him with all your heart. If you can't spend time, you're not going to land him. When I met my wife in college, it wasn't this. What's the minimum I can do to get her to the altar for marriage? No, it was a passionate pursuit, I'll tell you. Passionate pursuit. I wanted to spend so much time that my grades were already down, but they even went down further. That's what Jesus is waiting for.
Yeah.
He's just waiting for us to chase him. And when you do, you're going to discover something. And when you discover something, that's when it happens. So, because I get lots of people coming to me and say this, well, I'm going to get in business. And I said, why are you going to do that? They said, well, then when I make lots of money, I can help people. And I says, well, the bottom line is this. If you aren't doing it now, it's not going to happen later. That's the way it works. You are faithful with little things, I'll make you rule over bigger things. So start now with what you have, where you are, sharing, and then he's going to give you these bigger opportunities. Not that one person is bigger than another or one opportunity, but that's the way it goes.
Okay, Herb, my brother ended up in jail for a period of time, and he snored really loud. And the Hells Angels came up to him and they threatened him and said, Rob, is that you snoring? He said, yeah. I said, if you snore like that tonight, we're slicing your throat. He made it to stay awake 3 nights in a row, but on the third night, he couldn't do it anymore. And he got out of his bed, knelt down and said, God, if you don't get me out of here, I'm going to die in here. The next day, the warden calls him in and said, Rob, is there a death threat by the Hells Angels on your life? And he said, yeah. He says, I don't like people dying, and they're serious. He was paroled that day.
Oh, really, really?
You've had interactions with the Hells Angels, have you?
Yep, quite a bit.
Tell us a story of what happened to have that encounter with a motorcycle gang.
Well, like I said in my first program, one of the things that I learned to do under 2 world masters, one in Walla Walla, Washington, and one in Lac du Flambeau, Wisconsin, that I studied under these 2 guys, engraving guns. Well, what is a Christian doing? I've had people really question me, what are you doing playing around with guns? You know, engraving them for rich people and stuff like that. And my idea is do what you want to do and then take God along with you. So anyways, to make a long story short, I've engraved a lot of guns in my life. In the steel, chisel and hammer.
Yeah.
And, but one time I was commissioned to do this incredible gun, no budget. You know, when there's no budget, that means just go lavish. So they wanted me to do 18 inches of 24 karat gold inlaid down the top facet of an octagon barrel, 16 inches down each side of the all 24 karat gold inlaid in vines and leaves. And then all the silver that was going to be used in the stock all carved, all the steel carved. So anyways, no budget. Finished it was $35,000 for the gun when it was done.
Wow.
And of course, a gun that expensive, Kentucky long rifle, you have to have a party for it apparently. So I get invited to the inaugural party. I don't know where this guy who commissioned this, I don't know where they live. It was 30 minutes away from where I lived, and this gun maker is international famous. So I thought, well, it's probably some German industrialist or Austrian or whatever. Someone 30 minutes from my place, so I get invited for the unveiling. So I go to the address. Well, I drive down, it's out in the country. I drive down in Langley, British Columbia. I drive down, and I see the mailbox that has the right number on it, but there's 50 motorcycles in there, all Harley Davidsons, and everybody's wearing Hells Angels patches. And I thought, oh, and I just looked at them. And here I am, a separatist Christian, right?
Yeah.
I go by, the numbers get smaller, I go the other way, and happened to look in there, and I brought in a famous ivory carver to inlay ivory and carve that on the stock as well, because they said no budget. I see him standing there, and then I see the gun maker, and I think, oh, for crying out loud, what I get myself into. I go in there, they have the unveiling, and the three of us craftsmen that worked on this thing, the gun maker, the ivory carver, and myself, the engraver, we just got slathered with praise for doing this amazing gun that they pulled some fabric off of and showed. So within the next hour, I had 2 years of ivory carvings to do, knives to carve, engravings to engrave, or guns to engrave. I didn't want to do them. I didn't want to hang around with these guys. But they said, hey, how much would you charge me and take this fossil ivory and turn it into blah, 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 carve it. And I said, well, and I just throw a high number because I didn't want to do it. And they says, fine, put me down on the schedule. Somebody, I got this Bowie knife. I want it fully engraved. How much you want for it? And I said, well, I just throw a high number. I had 2 years of engraving lined up. And then, of course, what do? You don't say no.
Yeah.
So I had to carry on with this. Well, then they started to like me.
Really?
Then they invited me to tie flies because I fish, and they knew that. So every Tuesday night for like 6 months, I'd hang out with a dozen Hell's Angels guys tying flies. We're all sharing our favorite flies. And yeah, the language was rough. The jokes were rough. But interesting. Did I say, oh, Jesus is my friend? No. But just my presence there and them knowing a bit about me, they quit swearing. And when somebody started to tell a dirty joke, somebody would say, just hold it.
Wow.
And so then it led on to more relationships with these guys. And then they invite my wife and I to go to Angel Acres out on the island where there's 640 acres. Anyways, make a long story short, they loved my wife and I. And they'd come up to our house when I'm sometimes gone and rolling up with Harley Davidsons with no mufflers. And is Herb here? And my wife's standing there like, oh. Anyway, so they invite us to Angel Acres with AC/DC there and all these big bands. And I said, well, how do we get there? I'm trying to get out of this. Oh, your wife can jump on with one of us and you can jump on with someone else. And I'm like, yeah, I can picture my wife jumping on the back of a hog. That's the motorcycle.
Yeah.
Riding to Angel Acres. Anyway, so for a number of years, I had a lot of really good friends in the Hells Angels and slowly drifted away because, I knew everything about how you grow pot and all that kind of stuff, not doing it, but, hearing about it. So I thought I'm the only guy that's the square peg in a round hole. So if something goes sideways, it could be me. So anyways, but yeah, no, that was quite interesting.
Wow.
And the gun engraving has led to tons of opportunities to witness.
Yeah.
To people nobody else would ever get to witness to.
So Herb, those are amazing stories that you've told us here. Are there any closing words or any thoughts that you would like to leave with the audience tonight?
Well, from experience, I want to tell you this much. Chase success and money all you want. It's going to end in a dead-end street. I can tell you that right now. I've been there, done that. And read the book of Ecclesiastes. Look at anybody that's already been down that road. You're going to find that out. But I can tell you one thing. You don't lose anything in your life by giving it all over to Jesus. You actually benefit. And he doesn't send you out to have a boring life in Borneo or something like I used to think. No, he takes you where you are. He amplifies everything you do. He amplifies your talents. He amplifies your connections. He amplifies everything you do for a reason. Because when people look up to you, because that's a natural way to share your testimony, a compliment is a silver platter. When somebody looks up to you and say, wow, you're amazing what you've done, half the battle's already done. You just simply say, oh, I'd love to take the credit, but not me, him. They're looking up, you just pass them on to God, and that's how easy it is. And God is willing to give you those accolades in the world. Why? If you're faithful with them and not let them go to your head and make you arrogant over them. God is willing to give you those accolades of the world because it's so easy to witness when somebody's complimenting you by just simply saying, not me, him, and sharing your testimony. That's how simple it is. There's nothing complicated about it. Don't think of the past when all these complicated formulas and what text you should use. Don't use any text. I never use a single text to lead someone to have a desire for Jesus. It's simply my story, formulating my story such that it fills their need, whoever you're sharing with. And you look out, your life is going to explode with relevance. You'll never look back. If you think your life is on this back street in some little town in Saskatchewan or wherever it might be, It's way bigger than that, because when you work for God, it's bigger than your town, your province, your country, or the universe. Why? Because you're working for the God of the universe. I challenge you, get a Bible, dig in, spend an hour a day, and let the rest just happen.
Have you been moved by this story and feel inspired to help us to continue bringing these impactful moments to life? Your support is essential for us to keep showcasing the volunteers making a difference. If you'd like to contribute to the production of Hope Channel Canada and its ministries, it's simple. Visit agentsofhope.ca, where you'll find various ways to donate. Debit, credit, Google Pay, Apple Pay, or send an e-transfer to Agents of Hope at hopetv.ca. Prefer mailing a check? Send it to Hope Channel Canada at 1148 King Street East, Oshawa, Ontario, L1H1H8. For a more personal connection, call us at 1-855-4HOPE-TV. That's 1-855-446-7388. Don't forget to subscribe to the YouTube channel, Hope Channel Canada, and click the notification bell so you'll never miss an episode. You can also watch the show on multiple platforms: hopetv.ca, cable TV, the Roku app, and the Hope Channel app. Are you looking for answers to life's most profound questions? Hope Study provides free online Bible courses that cover essential topics, all at your own pace and from the comfort of your own home. One of our enriching courses, The Unlimited Power of Prayer, invites you to discover the remarkable world of prayer. Here, talking with God is not just a boring routine, but a sincere conversation with the source of love and wisdom. This study will deepen your understanding of prayer's incredible power and help you build a stronger connection with God. Signing up is easy and completely free at hopestudy.ca. Begin your journey today and feel free to share this valuable resource with anyone else seeking answers. Uncover life's answers. Visit hopestudy.ca and start your journey today.